Howard was so surprised by the shift from being sexually stimulated to being cuddled in her arms that his unbridled passion made him grasp her breast in his hand compulsively in search of more stimulation. Rose laughed pleasantly at Bree's quest for the comforting nurture of a woman's breast and gently pulled his hand away as she turned to carry him back to the living room. Howard realized his mistake the minute she pulled his hand away from her tit. What had possessed him to think she was sexually attracted to him? He was only a little baby in her eyes, nothing more. As she walked him back to the living room, he began to understand what had happened. Somehow his infantile reflexes had become mixed with his adult desires and caused him to seek the solace at the sight which had pleased him both as an infant and as a man. As a baby, he had instinctively grasped the object of his desire, but his adult mind knew better than to behave like that. Obviously, the cortical censor of his mind was losing its grip on his actions the longer he remained in an infant's body. Howard knew a woman had to be courted and properly prepared to allow herself to be groped. Unfortunately, his infantile reflexes made him reach out and take whatever his subconscious wanted without thinking about the consequences. Howard thought with dismay that after his precipitate behavior, she wouldn't give him another opportunity to touch her in that fashion again. When they reached the living room, Rose put him in his playpen to amuse himself while she sat down on the end of the couch by the side table where the phone lay. She dialed a number and happily chatted with the person on the other end before giving Howard's address over the phone and inviting the other party to come over. Howard crouched on his hands and knees at the wall of mesh that separated him from freedom and wondered who she had invited. He wasn't concerned with being discovered as a man, but he did harbor grave concerns about the introduction of strangers into his presence. As Rose closed the call, Howard speculated on whether his trepidations were driven by the same fears a small child had when they were introduced to strangers. It was their sense of being helpless and unable to protect oneself that made infants so fearful, he conjectured. Certainly, he felt much the same concerns himself. If he could have spoken, he'd have told Rose that her guest was unwelcome in his house of woe. It was regrettable he was limited to the anguished whimpers of infancy. The loss of his ability to speak had left him powerless to object to the social arrangements of his caretakers. After a boring half-hour of sitting in his playpen and trying to watch videos of the latest creations of the paragons of youth-oriented music through the obscuring mesh, the doorbell rang. Rose answered the door and ushered in a well-muscled young man of approximately 18 years. Rose sat him on the couch and went to the kitchen to get a couple of soft drinks for them. Once they had gotten settled, Rose rested her head on the young man's shoulder while they talked quietly. The teenaged boy responded by putting his arm around her shoulder and drawing her closer to him. It was obvious to Howard that the boy would soon begin making his moves on her as he would have had he been in the boy's place. A few loving kisses on Rose's forehead by her boyfriend and then he worked his way down to her waiting lips. After a long breathless French kiss, he nuzzled her behind her ear, then bit her earlobes playfully. Howard could see the young man's efforts were having a profound effect on Rose. She moaned quietly in pleasure and wrapped her legs around his, then grabbed the boy's face between her two hands and kissed him passionately. This was the signal the boy had been waiting for. His hands silently crept up to her blouse and began unbuttoning her from the neck down. Apparently Rose was in full agreement with his intentions because she dropped one hand and dexterously began unfastening his shirt with just one hand as she caressed the side of his face with the other and continued to kiss him. Within minutes, their upper garments hung loosely about them as they continued to caress and kiss each other in a passionate embrace. Rose made the final move by unbuttoning the boy's jeans and loosening them so that his briefs were exposed. The prominent bulge in the young man's white cotton fruit of the looms made it apparent what his intentions were. Howard watched in fascination as the post-adolescent theater of early adult sexuality played out in front of him. Howard noted that the boy's actions lacked the grace of experience, but there was no questioning his desire for his girlfriend. He in turn unsnapped the front of her jeans and spread the zipper wide with his fingers, groping for the treasure that lay hidden beneath the frilly pink panties that Rose wore. Rose slipped her hand behind the lad and pushed his pants down to the couch cushion, then began tugging them down her boyfriend's legs in an odd parody of undressing an overgrown child. When the boy's pants fell to his ankles, he reciprocated by doing the same to her, albeit in a less graceful and more clumsy fashion than the way in which her elegant maneuver had been executed. The two of them kicked off their shoes and jeans without breaking their kiss, then shrugged their way out of their upper garments as they continued to embrace and pet each other in an ecstasy of carnal desire. Howard was spellbound as he watched the young man unfasten her bra while hugging her, then helped her dispose of the unwanted bit of cloth. Both Rose and her young paramour were only dressed in their underwear now, making Howard wish he was on the couch with them to take advantage of the opportunity. Rose's breasts were magnificent. They stood out perkily as her nipples hardened with passion. Howard's little penis became hard with desire and he drooled continuously on the plastic mat of the playpen as Rose's boyfriend began massaging her crotch. Howard waited for the culmination of the events unfolding before him with the anticipation of a gourmet lecture. He didn't have long to wait. The two of them slipped out of their underwear with the ease of a pair of 2-year-olds going out on an unauthorized romp away from their mothers. As the boy put his hand down to her crotch to begin fingering her, Howard loosed a soft gar of involuntary pleasure at the sight. All at once, the boy realized he had an audience and stopped cold. He took his hands off Rose and whispered desperately, "Rose, we can't do it here. There's a little boy in the playpen watching us." "Nu. Don't be silly, David," Rose said with the huskiness of intense sexual arousal. "He's only a little baby. He doesn't have the faintest idea of what we're doing." She winked at her boyfriend and said conspiratorially, "Even if he did understand, he can't tell his mommy about us. He's too young to talk." Rose rubbed the inside of his thigh with her hand and said in a silky voice, "Forget about him, lover. Let me show you something I've been thinking about doing for you for a long time."